Well, hello there. I'm here with Marc Ferrari, a guy that I have known now for a while, and this is the first time we've really had a chat like this. Marc, welcome. How are you?
All good in the hood. Thanks for having me on the Robbie Jeanette show.
Well, this is really a chance to talk about creativity and curiosity and the way that your early life became your later life. So I want to dig in a little bit to when you first realized that you were musical, when something drew you either to an instrument or to a listening experience or watching on TV where you kind of were drawn to it in a way that was a little extra.
Yeah, well, that memory is very clear in my head because I was a pretty rambunctious kid. I think uh, I think my folks were almost going to put me on Ritalin back in the day. 'Cause I just had all this energy. Was always running around, and so one day we were visiting some cousins. We were living on Long Island at the time. We were visiting some cousins and go over to visit the cousins. And, I was running around as usual, just burning off energy, and there was a guitar there. One of my cousins played guitar. And I remember my mom just giving me the guitar and saying, "Hey, play with this. Give us a break.
Yeah.
Here's a new toy for you. Here's something new." And that was it. I was 8 years old. And
Wow.
how do I remember I was eight? Because for my ninth birthday, they got me my first guitar.
What was it? What guitar was that?
Still have it. It's a Stella, uh, um, metal string, acoustic metal string guitar. And
Cool.
actually, it plays pretty good. I pulled it out the other day. And actually, I read an article in the LA Times about a music store in Eagle Rock, uh, and the guy was shown holding a Stella guitar.
Cool.
Called him, "Hey, what are these guitars worth?" He said, "Well, they made a lot of them. Even though this particular guitar is over 50 years old, it's not a museum piece or anything."
Right.
But that was my first introduction to the guitar, and I took to it, took to
What
it.
what would have been the first songs that you got under your fingers that you could
Yeah,
play?
well, in the very, very beginning, I did have lessons, to learn how to properly play it,
Right.
know. And I did learn how to read. I remember those old Mel Bay books.
Yeah.
So my first songs would have been those pretty easy, one or two string songs that you would play
Right.
on those things. And but I progressed, into I took lessons for a few years, and then my folks moved up to the Rochester area, and I continued taking lessons up there. Uh,
Was House of Guitars open at
House,
that point?
well, House of Guitars was open, but that didn't come on my radar till my teenage years. I
Right.
moved up to the Rochester area when I was 9. Uh, so it must have been shortly. I got my first guitar in January of '71. My folks moved up to Rochester in August of '71.
Gotcha. And what
So
what music that you were listening to? And a lot of times when we're young, we listen to our parents' music,
yeah,
but was there a band or a guitar player that oriented you into where you
well,
led with the guitar?
certainly the Beatles, because I remember my folks taking me to see one of the Beatles movies in the theaters. Back before 1971.
Yeah.
Whatever that would have been. Might have been Let It Be actually, because I believe it had a theatrical release back then. But
Yeah.
so certainly, I was trying to emulate some of those early Beatles songs at a pretty early age.
Yeah.
You and then yes, and from then, as I got older and moved into junior high and got exposed to, here I am, 13 years old, going into junior high, and then hanging out with older kids who are
Right.
listening to, Led Zeppelin and Aerosmith and Ted Nugent and Leonard
Yeah.
Skinner, you know, all those Bachman Turner Overdrive, back in the day.
Yep.
So that was, kind of like my first exposure to rock music was, hanging out with these older kids. And of course, then, trying to figure out that stuff,
Yeah. So
So,
was there a guitar player that when you heard them play, you were kind of mystified, like how? How does
yeah.
this person make this sound?
Yeah. Well, I think originally it was all of them,
Yeah, right.
it was all of them. But when we fast forward to a year later, 1976, I'm 14 years old and I go see Kiss,
Yep.
and that was the pivotal moment in my life, seeing Kiss at the Niagara Falls Convention Center in April of 76. And they were still, I think they had just started touring on the Destroyer album. They're still doing most of Kiss Alive 1,
Oh man,
Yeah.
that's cool.
But then, Ace Frehley was the guy,
Yeah.
you know.
And just that the extras of the lights and the smoke and shooting sparks out of his guitar. I mean, nobody was doing anything remotely like that at the
No, of
time.
course not. Um, so because we chatted offline about my experience at the Niagara Falls Convention Center, because, going there for the first time, my first concert, I walk in there and it was like the biggest place I'd ever been in my life,
Right.
it was, you know, it was just, so over, the stimulation with everything, the
Yeah.
sights, smells, the sounds,
All
everything.
of it.
Yeah. And then many, many years later, this was like 40 years later, I was back visiting my parents and we went to Niagara Falls for the day. And they had something going on in the Niagara Falls Convention, so like an arts and crafts show or something.
Right.
I walked back in there and it was like so small. I was like, what? This is the place that I saw Kiss. This was the place that, overwhelmed my senses.
Right.
And it was so small. It was maybe 2,500 seater.
It just the perspective we have when we're young and everything seems so big. It's really crazy to go back years later and
Yeah.
realize how, the reality of it.
Yeah. But that was the pivotal moment in my life, seeing Kiss that night. And
Yep.
I knew from that moment forward, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be up there too, making noise,
Yep.
you know, shooting flames, whatever.
Yeah.
I how I was going to do it, when I was 14 years old, but
Right.
I knew that's what I wanted to do. And
So what made the
yeah,
biggest difference from 14 to let's say 18? What made the biggest difference in launching you in that direction during those kind of formative
well,
years?
yeah, I think it was becoming a better guitar player and a better musician. I started writing songs when I was 16, 17 years old.
Yeah.
They were horrible, but it was still the start of the creative process,
Right.
back then. So I think those years between 14 and 18, by the way, a little bit later on, I was exposed to other, great Eddie Van Halen. Van Halen came out in 78 when I was 16.
Right. And
Uh,
what was the impact? Because you'd seen Kiss 2 years earlier and Ace Frehley. What was the impact when you first heard Van Halen?
oh, it was like, this guy's from another planet.
Yeah.
I mean, Ace really, let's face it, he's a great blues bass guitar player,
Yep.
but he does kind of play in a box,
Yeah.
whereas Van Halen took that box and destroyed it.
Yeah.
There was no box for him,
Right.
you know. And the other guitar, well, and of course, I try to emulate. Everybody got in the finger tapping thing then,
Sure.
and the whammy bar. So,
Yeah.
because I was playing Les Pauls, and all of a sudden, you know, had to experiment with the whammy bar.
Well, you didn't have a whammy bar in your Les Paul, did you?
No, no, no,
I was going to say.
yeah. But and again, that was around the time all the custom guitar stuff started to happen.
Yeah.
The other guitar player that really became a huge influence on me was Michael Schenker,
Mm.
who I was exposed to probably around the same time, 16, 17 years old, and
Yeah.
for me, he was, and still is, he's like on the Mount Rushmore of guitar players for me,
Right.
for his melodicness,
Oh, yeah.
fluidness and speed and fluidity and melodicness. And, he wrote a great riff too,
True.
so,
And
uh,
it's with guitar players, some have such a melodic sensibility. When you get to like a Neil Schon or Steve Lukather or Gary Richrath,
Hmm.
People who you could really sing the solos versus pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
Who else would you put in that category of like the fluid melodic sing, you could sing the solo kind of guitar player?
Well, you mentioned Gary Richrath, and
Yeah.
very interestingly enough, my high school band was Southern rock based. It was called Southbound. So we were
Nice.
a lot of Skinnerd, a lot of REO Speedwagon,
Sure.
Marshall Tucker, um, Outlaws. We did, of course, we had to do Green Grass and High Tides.
Yeah.
So Gary Richrath was very, very underrated. He's
Agreed.
normally mentioned in like the Mount Rushmore's guitar player, but he was fast, he was fluid, he had his own sound to him,
Yeah.
and
But
so
you could like yeah, as a budding musician, he was
yeah,
one of the players where, when the solo came,
yeah,
you just kept singing the solo. You got done
yeah,
with the vocal part, and then the solo,
yeah.
So
So, so
that
there's
sense.
one more
Go,
guitar player
please.
that came along in that period of time, melodicness, speed, fluidity, Gary Moore.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I mean Gary Moore, Parisian Walkways, all that. I mean, talk about melodicness,
yeah.
you know,
He was like a guitar player's guitar player in some
yeah,
ways.
yeah.
You know,
So yeah, between Schenker and I was the first three big guys to influence me were all the blues bass guys, Page, Perry, and Fraley. They were all Kiss, Zeppelin, Aerosmith. They're all Les Paul players for the most part.
right?
Perry played a Strat too, but those were the first three. And then as I mentioned, Schenker and Gary Moore and Judas Priest. Oh my God, Judas Priest and
Yep.
those guys came along. Priest, AC/DC, and Thin Lizzy. They were the kind of the next three that kind of shaped my direction, I guess.
So when you were starting to see concerts and getting out more to shows, was there a band you went to see kind of thinking, I'll just go see this band that blew you away that you kind of didn't expect to be as good as they were going to be?
Yeah, funny. I saw AC/DC as an opening band twice,
Wow.
and yeah, I saw them twice as an openers, and yeah, that was one of them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, they had the visual part of it with Angus running around,
Yep.
but they just had that groove, man, and they just stripped it down to the bare, the bare essence of rock.
Yeah. How many riffs can you write in E? And, it sounds like, oh my God, that's so simple. Anybody could come up with it. But Malcolm,
Yeah. So
he,
certainly they were a great surprise. I remember seeing them twice. I saw so many concerts back then. Now you mentioned Journey. I saw Journey in '78, I believe.
oh, that's great.
Yeah, '78. So it was pretty early on. That's before they were monstrous.
Yep.
And you mentioned Neil Sean, a great example of speed, fluidity,
Oh, yeah.
tone, phrasing, all that stuff.
Everything. Just he
Yeah,
has there's a sensibility there that everything he does is just, it's singable.
yeah,
How
yeah.
about Randy Rhoads?
You know, you may find this surprising, but he wasn't a huge influence on me. And I saw Blizzard of Oz in '81, and by that time, I guess I'd already kind of, I think that album came out in 1980, if not
I think
mistaken,
so. Yeah.
first album. So I don't recall really, being, studying him as much.
Right.
I think for me it was Schenker already had it,
Right.
and
Interesting.
and I think there's some similarities in the both Schenker and Randy Rhoads they had classical influence to them, right?
Right.
Neoclassical influence to them, and I think by that time Schenker was my guy.
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm not gonna I'm gonna discard Randy Rhoads. I'm not gonna
Right.
acknowledge talent, genius, his plan, whatever. It's just that he wasn't an influence on me as much as some of the other guitar players that we just mentioned. Now,
So, oh, yeah.
very interestingly enough, fast forward to 1984 when I got in Keel,
Yeah.
and our second show with Kelly Rhodes was the opening act.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
A small world, right?
yeah.
So
So
what year did you actually come out to LA?
'84.
84. Okay. So all the stuff that was happening here in 82, 83, the early Motley Crue and Rat and stuff, you were aware of that. And
Oh,
that, probably drew you out, right?
Oh, of course. It's a kind of interesting story how I found my way to come out west. But sure, 82, 83, you had, all those great
Metal
four,
Health,
forefather LA bands
right?
had indie releases, Dokken,
Yep,
Great White, Rat, Crew, they all had indie releases before they were signed.
right. Yeah,
And I was well aware of it. And the other album that I had, which became kind of part of my story, was the Steeler album.
yeah. With Ingve,
The thing that came out in '83, and I had made contact with Mike Varney. Um, I made contact with Mike Varney in 1980 when I was still in high school.
wow.
Yeah, I tried to get in on his column.
Yep,
He featured two or three players every month in his guitar player column, and of course,
right.
a lot of famous guys have been featured in that column.
Yeah, I
I
remember it. Like Tony
Yeah,
McAlpine and all those guys,
Ingve,
the shred column.
yeah, Paul Gilbert, Billy Sheehan.
Yep.
But anyways, for a holiday present in 1983, Mike Varney sends me a bunch of his albums,
Okay.
of which one of them was the Steeler album. Of course, I guess with Ingve, that's another example of someone that just kind of blew the doors off the rules or whatever. And
Yeah,
I guess you could make the argument that, certainly, there's Hendrix, there's Van Halen, and then Ingve for that style of music. He
sure.
was the first guy to really bust the doors open. And maybe there were guys playing like him before, but they weren't brought to the forefront.
Right.
So
Um, it,
yeah.
it's interesting those different styles of evolution through rock guitar. Who would you say in that early burgeoning metal scene was an underrated talent that's been a little forgotten? Like somebody that was just maybe they didn't have the songs or the vocalist, but man, they were a great player.
Well, we mentioned Gary Moore. Gary Moore didn't have a lot of commercial success in this country, right?
Right.
But over in Europe, he was, obviously he was in Thin Lizzy. He comes to mind right away, and I'm sure there's a few others that I'm forgetting right now because I haven't had my second cup of coffee yet. But I guess Gary Moore, you know, again here in the States, he wasn't really widely recognized beyond the guitar player community,
Right.
right?
I mean, when you were hearing these early indie records from, let's say, Rat and Motley Crue and a lot of the core Sunset Strip bands, were there any guitar players that stood out to you in that realm, or were you like, man, I could take these guys. I'm going to LA. This is
Oh, no. Well, interesting, because obviously with Great White and Motley Crue, you got two blues-based guitar players, and Rat, you've got Warren DeMartini, obviously
amazing.
one of the greats. So I never thought I could quote unquote take any of them,
Well, I didn't mean take, but I mean like, felt that you were at a level where you
Yeah,
could come there and hang.
yeah. I felt by the time that I moved out here that I had the skill set,
Yep.
to throw my hat in the ring and compete. But again, I didn't have that opportunity until I got involved with Keel.
Right. And
So
so were you playing all the Sunset Strip clubs and that whole scene at that time in
yeah,
84?
so getting back to the Varney thing now, I
Yeah.
think I've mentioned this before in other interviews how I got introduced to Ron Keel. Because I moved out to Los Angeles in early '84, and I had a cover band back east. Um, and our game plan was to move the band. Everybody moves out west, and then we become rock stars, just like
Right.
everybody. I just,
Just like everybody.
just it was that simple, right?
Yep.
You get off the bus, and there's an A&R guy right there waiting.
Sign you right away.
So, anyways, move out. Um, Three of the guys moved out a few months ahead of me. I spent the holidays with my folks. I moved out to January of '84. Tried to get these guys. Our drummer didn't move out with us, so we had to find a drummer. And I just tried to motivate these guys, and it was just they were just into partying and going to the Rainbow and sleep until 2 o'clock, that kind of
Yep.
thing. And they wound up moving back, all of them.
Wow.
And I decided that I wasn't going back to Boston. I wasn't from there.
Right.
I just knew, there was so much energy in the city at that time. There was a scene there.
Yeah.
In '84 was also the year the Olympics were coming to LA. It was just a lot of energy in the city. So
Right.
I stuck it out. One day I'm up at the Rainbow and I leave my jacket. I had a leather jacket that I had for a while. Left it on the seat. Go up, take a piss. Come back, the jacket's gone.
Oh man.
Oh man, right. I guess my naivety wore off pretty quick there.
Yeah.
So no,
Damn.
can't put your leather jacket on the seat. So
No.
anyway, true story. I'm down on Melrose looking for another jacket. I'm in this store and I look around, see this guy, and it's Mike Varney.
Really?
It was Mike Varney, and yeah, like I recognized him from his photos, and I never met him before. I'd spoken with him, but I'd never met him. And so that was the next fortuitous moment in my life
And
where,
he knew you. He recognized you
yeah,
from.
well, I went up to him,
Yeah.
and told him, hey, I've been here in town for a bit and looking for something to do. My buddies are, my band I moved out here to join, evaporated on me. And he
Yep.
put me in touch with Ron Keel. It was around the same time that Ron was disbanding Steeler.
Right.
Steeler had been passed by multiple labels multiple times. There was
Right.
revolving door of musicians in that band. All great players, by the way. Mitch Perry was in there for a while,
Yeah.
and he's a great player, of course.
Absolutely.
And so that's how that's how I got introduced to Ron. And that
And
was
were there any other bands you auditioned for or could have auditioned for
well,
that kind of?
I'll get to another little story here. It's funny you mentioned that because there's another one. Anyways, so that was March of '84, and I actually went to the last Steelers show with him down in San Diego. And a month later, we're headlining Perkins Palace in Pasadena, our first show, which is in April of '84.
Right on. That's
And then,
quick.
yeah, and then that's what, Ron did have a following, you know, uh,
Yep.
he had a draw, you know.
Did you have to play Steeler songs or did you have new
Yeah,
material?
I think there were a couple of Steelers songs, because we didn't have a lot of uh, Keel material.
So you had to
Yeah,
learn some Yngwie parts or?
yes. Don't forget, Keel was a two guitar player band.
Right.
The other guitar players, were definitely more of that style, you know.
Gotcha.
Um, in our very first show at Perkins Palace, the other guitar player in the original lineup was this guy David Michael Phillips, who went on to play in King Cobra.
Okay.
But he left the band after our first show because he got an offer from King Cobra, I guess, and he was hedging his bets that Carmen was an easier ticket to the big time than Ron Keel, I guess.
And yeah, well, we see how things turn out, you know? You
We
never know.
Yeah, so then we eventually landed on Brian
Yep.
J.
Yep.
And so he joined us for our second show, which is the one that Kelly Rhodes opened up for. So
Nice.
yeah, so but once Keel happened very quickly,
Yeah.
very very quickly. So and by June of '84, so literally 3 months
Yep.
after I had met Ron, we recorded our debut album, Lay Down the Law,
Yeah.
up in Kotati. And then we got signed in August of that year. 2 months later, we got
Wow.
signed in August and went back into the studio that month with Gene Simmons. So here it is. I had been in Los Angeles less than 7 months and
Right.
had done two records,
And you're in the studio with Gene Simmons, who from Niagara,
originally recording artists and yeah, hanging out with the God of Thunder. Sure,
what was your first meeting with Gene like?
yeah,
Was it intimidating or was he?
yeah, it was. Yeah, honestly, we were all a little nervous and, you know, he can come across not being the warmest of guys, but he does have a funny, silly side too. Like once you crack that shell,
Yeah.
a little bit, he opened up. But yeah, certainly the first time we were nervous because we were playing for him, and he's a big guy with a deep voice and very
Yeah.
serious. So
And,
yeah.
one of his other finds that I love is that first EZO record
Hmm.
with Destroyer and Flashback Heart Attack.
Sure, I
That
remember.
was some good stuff.
Yeah.
I was more of an EZO fan than a Hurricane fan. It's
Okay.
just my preference, the singer, I don't know, there was something about those songs and the, you know, but Gene Simmons obviously has his own career, but for him to sign bands and get out there and, with early Van Halen demos and, different things, I mean, he definitely had his finger on the pulse and was looking for
Yeah.
activity and opportunity.
Yeah. I think he had something to do with Cinderella too, if I remember correctly.
I don't know,
I
maybe.
think he did, even before Bon Jovi was involved. So,
Yeah.
but so anyways, that was, for a kid from a small town farming community, to, move to Los Angeles, and, I went from 0 to 60 pretty quickly.
Yeah. What were your favorite venues in LA on the Sunset Strip to play at the time? Like what was the club that just was the
Well,
best?
we played, funny, we didn't play the whiskey talk, and we never played Gazzari's. And we played,
Interesting.
yeah, we never played Gazzari's. We did play the Troubadour. We played 2 nights at the Troubadour, sold out.
Nice.
And then the other place that we played very frequently, not on the Strip, was what's the place in Reseda that
The
why
Paladinos?
no, no, no. God, I'm drawing a blank now. Anyways, it was a place in Pasadena. I'm not Pasadena. I'm sorry. The Valley,
No, I know the
Reseda. Yeah, I know. It's like, why can't they film movies there? That's where Boogie Nights was filmed. And
yeah,
yeah,
it pre
Country
pre
Country Club,
yes, the Country Club.
Country Club. We played there like 4 times that year, including I remember Christmas '85. We played 2 shows that day.
I would think Azari's would be a natural fit for you
I
guys.
For some reason we just never did it. We
What about the Starwood?
never played the Starwood either. I think the Starwood was done by '84. I'm pretty sure.
Coconut Teaser?
I played the Coconut Teaser many years later, but not with Keel.
Ah,
So yeah,
that Cold Sweat or Medicine Wheel or
yeah, Medicine Wheel. Yeah.
nice. Well, let's post Keel. You obviously, split from Keel at some point
Mhm.
to move on to other things. You know, not any dirty laundry. Once you left Keel and you were kind of looking to spread your wings, that exactly when Cold Sweat came into being, or did you have a period where you were kind of in between?
Uh, no, Cold Sweat started right after I left Keel. I remember I did a first round of demos like a couple of months after I left Keel. This would have been the spring of 1988. And no, I knew, I had some momentum, coming off a band that had done 4 albums and toured with Bon Jovi, and
Yeah,
new band in Circus Magazine, and uh, 3 or 4 of those. This is a true story. Keel beat out Bon Jovi and Iron Maiden for Best New Band in 1985 in some magazines.
that's pretty
So,
awesome.
yeah, that was the last time our name was ever above those guys' names.
I mean, things flip and switch. I mean, I remember seeing Monsters of Rock and, Metallica went on before Dokken.
Right.
So
Yeah.
these things happen. So I'm gonna bring up my
Ooh,
vinyl copy of Cold
yeah.
Sweat here just to break out of the
Yeah.
of my record collection.
Yeah.
Chris McClernand,
Yeah.
obviously somebody we have in common. Chris played with Saigon Kick in the 90s, and I did some touring, my first tour as a keyboard player for Saigon Kick. So I got a good dose of Chris and his amazing sense of humor on the road.
Yeah.
I
He's
remember he and Phil Varone, the drummer, they did a radio show. I want to say it was in Houston that they got the DJ going so far. I think he got fired. Like they just lured him over the edge. Was Chris always funny in the band back
yeah.
then?
He was definitely the class clown. Uh, the other guys in the band also were silly guys, And
Um,
because I've been accused of being too serious, and I don't know if too serious is the right word, but the right phrase, but I've always been the business guy in all my bands,
yep.
and I think in every band it's good to have some guy that's got their finger on that part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay to go out and have a few beers and chase a few girls and everything, but
Right. When
you know,
that becomes the whole job, it
yeah,
takes your eye off the
yeah.
ball.
But in answer to your question, Chris was definitely a breath of fresh air, and as we both know, he's got a very unique sense of humor,
Yeah. Love
self-depreciating
that guy.
humor.
So, when you were young, you had a definition of success, and then once you came and got in the business, your definition of success probably changed, I would think. And
Yeah.
then as you went through different stages, so when somebody's starting out, if you were talking to, a young musician, how would you temper their idea of success? Like you're not going to get off the bus and the A&R guy's going to sign you. What do you think is most important for somebody to have as a metric for their success beyond just financial or just
Well,
a record deal?
yeah, and let's also um, realize that today's success is different than it was back in the 80s.
100%.
Because back then the whole goal was major label. Major
Right.
label, that was the golden ticket. That was the thing that you were striving for, was that major label deal. Because back
Right.
then in the 70s or 80s, they had the muscle, they had the money,
Right.
they had the promotion, they had the distribution means. But now that's been flipped,
Right.
and anybody with an iPad and a microphone, can become an international star.
Yep.
So I think the whole concept of success has changed.
Right.
Uh, I think now just having longevity, any kind of longevity, is maybe a better measure of success. Because let's face it, a lot of these, even these influencers or internet stars, they come and go. They're
Yeah.
disposable.
Yep.
Whereas when I grew up, the bands that I listened to growing up, sometimes it took 3 or 4 albums to break a band.
Yeah.
Case in
Big
point,
time.
Kiss.
Yep.
Case in point, Journey. Journey had a bunch of albums before Steve Perry got in, and
REO Speedwagon.
REO Speed. I think most bands.
Yep.
I mean, you had the occasional band like Boston that came out and sold 15 million albums,
Right.
but back in the 70s and into the early 80s, it was all about building.
Yeah.
It was all about building that foundation and then building on that foundation. You toured every year.
Yeah.
You hopefully played slightly bigger venues, sold slightly more albums, but the record companies in general would give you 3, 4 albums to develop. So
Right.
that doesn't happen anymore. So I
So
think,
what
yeah, I think maybe today the goal of anybody is maybe just trying to hang in there past the third inning.
right, yeah. So
So
when you were uniquely in the rock scene when we got into the 90s and Nirvana came out and kind of
mhm,
almost dropped a bomb on everybody because that style was something that if you were an 80s glam metal band,
mhm,
if you were to change and try to adapt to that style, it was almost you couldn't do it. And if you were to stay the same, that style almost rendered it, you know, comically passé.
right.
And a lot of bands had trouble crossing that barrier. I also like to mention that Jane's Addiction, who the first album came out, I think, in '88, was also a big crossing point that a lot of bands didn't, go with and weren't influenced by them. And some could kind of get past that. Saigon Kick, I think, was a band that had a lot of post Jane's Addiction influence, but that one ballad sucked him into the hair metal
Yeah,
label. So
yeah.
how did you when you were making music, how did you see Nirvana and the grunge movement hit in terms of the music you were making and what was popular at the time?
Well, I certainly was one of the dinosaurs that got hit by the asteroid, the grunge movement asteroid.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to go on record saying that I liked some of those bands.
Yeah.
I think like any other genre, towards the end, there was just a lot of them that kind of started sounding similar to me. But certainly Soundgarden, because they had that Sabbath influence. I
Yeah.
love Soundgarden.
Oh
You can
yeah.
tell those guys were, heavily into Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
And certainly Alice in Chains had a little bit of that Sabbath, and they had those layered vocals, and so I like those two bands. But to answer your question, I think it was time for a change. Let's face it, by 1980, you know, late late 80s, early 90s, there were 100 hair bands out there
Yeah.
that were generically similar. A lot of them you couldn't tell apart from each other, and I get it.
Yeah.
It was time for a change.
Yeah.
Um, so
Do you think any bands successfully transitioned musically to the 90s that they escaped that label or that stereotypes
It's interesting. I toured with Queensryche. I think they were so unique, and they kind of had. I don't know if grunge was the right word, but they were darker.
Yeah.
They were darker to be. I don't even know if those guys have recorded a song on a major key in their whole career. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we toured with Queensryche. I love those guys, and to me, they kind of were one of those bands that just kind of went through. They
Yep.
weren't really too phased by it. Whereas some of the popular commercial bands, the Warrants, the Poisons,
Yeah. They had a hard time.
they had a hard time. You can make the argument that Aerosmith had resurrected their career in the
For
late,
sure.
but they weren't really considered part of the hair metal. They were
Right.
already entrenched. They were already one of the biggest bands of the '70s, anyways.
Totally.
So there were some bands that were able to kind of hang in there and ride out the storm, ride
Yeah.
in. Storm.
King's X, I think, but there's a
Yeah,
band that was unique enough
yeah,
that when music transitioned, they just kept doing what they did, you
yeah.
know?
Well, King's X, King's X is one of my favorite bands of all time. You know,
Yeah.
I remember hearing that first album the first time. I'm like, what the fuck? What
Yeah.
this? You know?
Out of the Silent Planet, right?
Yeah, it was like Metallica meets the Beatles, meets the Bee Gees, meets
Everything.
yeah,
I want to circle back to Black Sabbath. I think the first, let's say, 2 decades of Black Sabbath's career, they were not necessarily seen as the godfathers of metal, the touchstones, until really that grunge movement, like you were saying, brought Sabbath and even like the heavier Neil Young stuff as, they were like, these are our roots. And people are like, oh, that makes sense now, and Black Sabbath, I think, became the Godfathers, but during the whole period, they were popular and had popularity, but I don't think they were seen as the influence they really became.
I think it took a little time
Yeah,
for for the general public to come around to the fact that these guys were the headwaters of metal.
yeah,
Them and Priest, but Sabbath was out before Priest.
yeah,
First Sabbath album was 1970.
yeah. So, and Zeppelin was tagged as metal, but they weren't really.
Same with Deep Purple. I mean, Deep Purple
Yeah,
were you know
it's
metal, blues metal,
heavy.
yeah,
Yeah.
heavy rock.
Yeah, and it's always interesting. There's certain bands, Led Zeppelin or Van Halen, where they're rock bands, but they have, Van Halen has Big Bad Bill and all these different textures that, yes, they're a rock band, and yes, they rock as hard as anybody else, but there's more to the music here than just the rock. And it's interesting that some bands are able to expand within their sound and thereby release themselves a little bit from whatever genre people are trying to attach to them.
Mm.
Are there other bands that you would say fall into that category where they kind of expanded beyond just one thing and that's what made them so iconic?
That's an interesting question. I have to give that some thought. But it did trigger another. You mentioned about bands that kind of just went through,
Yeah.
without having AC/DC and Iron Maiden. Both of those guys stuck
Yep.
to guns, plowed through that whole thing.
Yep.
They were, and maybe Scorpions too. I don't know. The Scorpions might have been impacted a little bit more by the grunge scene, but certainly Maiden and Priest, man, they did their thing and they got bigger.
Yes.
They got
Agreed.
they got bigger, right?
And then Metallica, with the Black Album, they changed, but they still play the old stuff just as well. And it's hard because sometimes they do something like that, and then the older fans say, "Oh, now they're they've sold out." But then you put on the Black Album, you're like, this is actually pretty good stuff. It's interesting to see like another conversation would be bands that hit the 80s and changed their sound and adapted and were successful with it. Like Yes with 90125
Yeah,
or Rush with Signals, Grace
yeah.
Under Pressure, Power Windows. The Police going from Outlandos to Ghost in the Machine. Are there bands that you were a fan of or were aware of that made that transition and did something different in the 80s that to you stood out?
Well, you mentioned, it's funny. I think you mentioned a couple of the best examples. I would have, Rush certainly. They stopped those 12-minute songs.
Yeah.
Maybe many of those 12-minute songs that took up all of side two.
Yeah.
And they did have some commercial success with Spirit of the Radio and
Yeah.
you know,
Tom Sawyer.
yeah, Tom Sawyer, of course. A few other singles. Um, yeah, I think those are two, two really good examples that you mentioned,
Yeah.
And again, I'm sure I'm forgetting about a few that we could put in that same general category of bands that, try to, change with the times without, being, you know, overtly different from. What they really are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, let
But even,
me,
look, even Deep Purple. Well, let's talk
yeah,
about because they had a couple of singles,
Perfect Strangers.
Perfect Strangers.
Nobody's home, knocking at
Yeah,
your back door.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, and so, when in the 80s, you knew these bands like Deep Purple and David Bowie had a past, but you might not have been, watching videos on MTV
Yeah.
so aware of that past. So
Yeah.
David Bowie with Let's Dance or, Nobody's Home or whatever, you might get into it, and then it took you time to kind of dig back and, oh, wow, this early stuff is different,
Yeah.
because at that point they had morphed and changed a little bit, so you had to almost get used to what they started with.
Well, I think also, you know, the bigger MTV got, the more influence it had on certain bands to kind of can we move it just a little bit here so we can
Yeah.
maybe get in that spotlight? I think,
Yep.
Rainbow is another example. They were definitely a little more gothic heavy, and
Yep.
that all of a sudden it's Since You've Been Gone, and a few
The
other,
pop hits.
yeah, pop hits. So
But
I think there was probably, there was some of that going on where people just wanted to shift just a little bit,
yeah,
let's
and
move.
get a hit, because
Yeah,
you can make albums all day long, but if you weren't catching fire, if you weren't on the radio, on MTV, and I know in that 80s period, to get on Headbangers Ball or to get on a video on MTV could mean the difference,
sure.
could make the entire difference. Were there bands that you became familiar with via MTV where you saw a video and you're like, oh my gosh, that, or were you,
Twisted Sister, I think. Well, I was
yeah,
I was vaguely familiar with Twisted Sister, because I was living in New York,
yeah,
in the Boston, or as early as '82, I think '83. But certainly, Twisted Sister became one of those bands that certainly were video driven. Let's put it,
yeah,
you
big
know,
time.
yeah, big time. And it didn't do too much harm for their career, I don't think. It helped them,
No.
you know.
I mean, you put that on, the "We're Not Going to Take It" video for any kid, and they love it. It still has that, like he's taking mom and dad to town.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I think probably stylistically, the Right to Rock video board pretty heavy from that storyboard,
yep,
about the kid with the radio and going against the authorities and that kind of thing. The kid's the hero.
right, of course. That's why, well, you're appealing to, kids in small towns out there dreaming about, the big rock and roll life and coming to the city, and you put in your tape of the Kiss interview where Paul Stanley's in bed surrounded by all these women, and you're like, all right, something's going on out there. I got to get out there. Um, so, some questions that I like to ask: are there records that you love that generally have terrible production, but you just love them anyway?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, certainly some of the early Thin Lizzy albums, thin production,
Yeah.
but and I'm talking, Johnny the Fox and some of those albums, Nightlife and stuff. They're
Yeah.
thin sounding.
Yeah.
Some of those, yeah. Even the first Kiss albums,
Yeah.
those songs that became such concert classics on Kiss Alive 1. You listen to the original recordings, they're like, that's the same song, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
While we're talking about live albums, Frampton Comes Alive was a big touchstone for me.
Yeah.
And I had, and if you listen to some of the early Frampton albums, the live versions and recordings are just so much energetic and just brings life to,
I would
that's just,
say same thing with Cheap Trick at Budokan.
yeah, yeah,
I want you to want me on record is not the
yeah,
excitement of the
yeah,
live album.
yeah. So I think there's probably plenty of examples of albums, certainly from the '70s, that production value, you know,
Right.
to them now, and listen to albums that are produced now, and it's like, night and day.
Yeah, but it's, I guess it's nostalgia, or it just hit you at a certain time, or you listened on cassette or whatever it was. That it just, the music still holds that something for you that you're like, I know this is very dated production, but I still like it. What can I say?
Even those old AC/DC albums are very, very dry, you
Yeah.
know, but the one thing about that kind of production is you hear all the instruments. They're separated so much. Like now,
Right.
everything, a lot of albums are swimming in reverb.
Right.
It's back then. You can hear like the pick scrapes, and you can hear,
All that.
yeah, all that. Yeah, for
That was
sure.
the good stuff. Um, I love talking about records and songs and stuff. What would be a song that you waited to hear on the radio? Like you had to wait back in the day. People nowadays don't understand. You wanted to hear a song and it was going to be on the radio. You had to sit and wait, maybe with a cassette player ready to tape it, you know?
Yeah.
What would be a song you waited to hear on the radio?
Oh my God, there's probably so many of them. Obviously, when I was 14, 15, it was the Kiss stuff, rock and
Yep.
roll later, Cat Scratch Fever, cat,
Yeah.
definitely into Nugent there for a while because he was larger than life,
Oh yeah.
and some of those other, you know, um, maybe well, Highway to Hell was until 1979, I think, but certainly I remember because they were playing songs with the word hell in it a lot,
Right. Back when mu music was satanic. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But probably, certainly those examples that I mentioned,
Yeah.
um,
What's a hardship that you overcame that taught you a lot and made you who you are?
hmm. Well, I think I feel pretty fortunate that you know, I didn't have any physical, it's not like I was born with something physical that I had to overcome.
Yeah.
I didn't have to overcome abject poverty, or I didn't have to overcome, a crappy home life. I came from a good family,
Yeah.
So, I guess there really wasn't too much I felt that I had to, really quote unquote overcome. Only,
So how about a different question? How
yeah,
about a mistake that taught you more than success could have?
yeah. Well, maybe not maybe putting all my eggs in one basket. Now, I wanted to, you asked a question earlier about auditioning for other people. So
Yes,
I want to circle back to that
please.
because after the first Keel show in April of '84, Ron announced that he was joining that he got the gig for Black Sabbath.
What?
Yes, this is all true. You can research this.
Wow.
Yeah, and actually, a couple of the Black Sabbath guys were at our first show, and so we were all scrambling. Okay, we just rehearsed a month solid.
Right.
Sold out show, Perkins Palace.
Right.
You're breaking up the band after one show. What am I going to do? Oh my God.
Yeah.
So found out that Lita Ford was auditioning for guitar player, right?
Wow.
So I got an audition for Lita. Of course, was very familiar with her. And
Yeah.
think I think she already had one album out in '83 or '84 that had a single.
Was this before Mitch Perry played with
Yo,
her?
yeah. So this would have been '84. So
Okay.
well before Mitch. And this was a salaried gig, and she was
Yeah.
ready to go to Europe. And I'm like, oh my God, I want this gig so bad.
Yeah.
I went down there dressing, I had leather pants on. I looked like Joe Perry. And um, she liked me, but her manager wanted somebody to play keyboards as well so they could
Ah.
save salary. And didn't play keyboards. Lost on that gig, but yeah, we still joke about that when I see her.
Yeah. That's all
But
right. She's
yeah,
still making her career out there. She's still
yeah. So
out
that
doing
was,
it.
and then like 3 weeks later, Ron's out of Black Sabbath, and we just kind of picked up where we left off.
Was that before like Ian Gillan and Born Again and all that?
I'm not sure of the time frame because Sabbath was going through a lot of singers. It was Tony Martin for a
Right.
while. There was Ian Gillan, as you know,
Ray Gillan, no relation.
Ray Gillan, Ian Gillan.
Did you ever see Badlands back in the day?
Not only did I see them, Cold Sweat did a number of dates with them, and we rehearsed next door to them for a long time.
Oh man.
And
What a singer that guy was.
oh yeah, for sure. And the bass player in Badlands was the brother of Kenny Chason from Keel.
Oh, okay.
Greg
So,
Chase, Greg Chason.
yeah.
Yeah, so
So you had a lot of cross-pollination.
We love Badlands because they were like, they were like the 90s Zeppelin, they
Yeah,
uh,
so
and
good. And it's
all yeah, all four of those guys, of course,
Eric
great.
Singer,
Eric Singer on drums and Ray Gillen, as you mentioned. What a voice, what a look,
and then Jakey Lee on guitar.
Well, no slouch there either.
Nope, post Ozzy. And I think a band like Badlands has disappeared from the public consciousness. And those who know, obviously know, but there's a lot of bands like that that I felt were really, really good. Maybe had one album and disappeared. You remember a band called Catmandu?
No, you got me there.
No, that so like one album and then gone.
Yep.
But you know, that one album or that one period of time, there was a little magic there. Are there other bands like that for you that you heard in the 80s or played with or jammed with that had that one moment and then gone, but that one album still kind
And
of
Kingdom Come is certainly a band in that category.
what love can be?
Yeah, they had that one. They had that one
Get
big
it
out.
on.
Yeah, and they were on the Monsters of Rock tour
Yeah.
there.
I
Whatever.
think the singer Lenny Wolf organized the Monsters of Rock. I think that was his baby.
It may have been. I don't know.
Something about that. They went
Okay.
on first,
But yeah, you asked about bands that had that they were other bands I'm sure that had like, I guess maybe you could say the same for Saigon Kick, right? You
yeah.
had that one huge hit.
Yeah, Love is on the Way. They had for those first two records. The first one was Michael Wagner produced, and then The Lizard, and then Matt left, and
Yeah.
those. So yeah, there's certain bands like that that they just had a moment, and I still put on like that Easy O record. I'll still put that on because I love the music,
Yeah.
and of all the bands I want to reunite for the Monsters of Rock cruise or whatever. Come
Yeah.
on, Easy O.
Yeah.
Uh, so are there records from the 80s from that era that you still regularly put on for your own pleasure?
You know,
Anything?
I'll give you some of my guilty pleasures.
Nothing's guilty here. I want to hear all your pleasures.
I got, first time I heard Sarah McLachlan, I was like, it was just something emotional. Her first album, but that was until '94. So,
Right?
but there was something I really connected with that side of me. The more the singer songwriter
Yeah.
side, and I got into a little bit later Elliott Smith.
Oh yeah.
Just what a beautiful tortured soul he was.
Perfectly put.
Who I continue to listen to all the time.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, Jeff Buckley, and just kind of tragically, three of my favorite male singer-songwriters all died,
Yeah.
way too young,
Yeah.
from different circumstances. But so that I got into that, still into that side of things, and
Yeah.
so
What was the first guitar player outside of the rock realm that really caught you?
well, first of all, you're talking about first. I saw Segovia when I was 10, 11, 12, or
Oh, how
12.
cool.
And I still play classical guitar. I met him twice. I met him at the show, and I got my program book autographed by him.
That's cool.
So, but if you're saying the first guitar player of any kind, it was certainly, Segovia. And I remember seeing jazz great Charlie Bird,
Oh, wow.
when I was really young. Jose Feliciano is a good guitar player in his own right.
Yeah,
BB King. Now, these are all concerts my parents took me to, like in my
sure.
formative years.
But watching a guy like Segovia play, did it make you say, "Oh my gosh, I want to do that," or were you just like, "Wow, this is
Oh,
mesmerizing"?
my gosh, I can't do
Yeah,
that.
right. I've
Or
seen piano players like that where I'm like, "All
yeah,
right,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a
Oh, by the time I saw Segovia, I already saw Kiss the same year. So, I, you
that's a
know,
good balance right
I
there."
went down that path. I went down the Kiss path rather than the Segovia path.
But when you were on your
Yeah,
outside of your parents taking you to stuff,
yeah.
did you gravitate to any, before you got into Sarah McLachlan or Elliott Smith, there's a period where you were very much into rock and roll, but were there other guitar players that, specifically you were at least aware of or that you kind of drew from a little bit outside of the rock realm, whether it's
Well, maybe not.
jazz or blues or
Yeah, well, certainly some of the jazz players. I mentioned Charlie Bird, and a few of those, Kessel, Barney Kessel, and
oh
a
yeah.
few others, um, that, even Chet Atkins, man. I remember like
Oh man.
like people forget about Chet Atkins, but that guy was a monster, you know.
Monster,
Even Glenn Campbell. I mean, who was, one of the big
the
studio
Wrecking Crew.
back, yeah.
Yeah. And
So
all those guys, I mean, Jerry Reed and Roy Clark and stuff you'd see on Hee Haw, and it looks
yeah.
so casual, and that you watch back now and you're like, that was not casual at all. They just looked really comfortable doing it.
That's right. So I like to think, I was exposed to a lot of different types of music when I was young.
Yeah,
I thank my parents for that, but they knew I was a music guy very early.
right.
By the way, I started teaching guitar when I was 13, 14. So that's how I supported myself.
Yeah.
That was my milk money.
And
Uh,
I know you wrote a column for a while in one of the music magazines, right?
yeah, it was in Metal Edge. It was the instrument column. I think it was called Power Sources. I've something like that. But yeah, no, my job was to sift through all the different equipment reviews that came in.
Right.
Releases, pick a few each month, and condense it into an easily readable column.
That's cool.
But
Hey, look, I wrote for a keyboard magazine for years, so it's interesting and also gets you
yeah,
into a realm where you're connecting and contacting and talking to people. And were you able to meet anybody through the magazine that you hadn't in person yet?
not really. I don't recall that opening up doors that weren't already open up for me.
Yeah.
But I did write. I've written two books. First of all,
Yes.
Rockstar 101, which came
Yep.
out, needs to be updated because it came out in 2000 and
How much has happened since
2002,
then? Yeah.
and so much has happened since then. But it was the first book written by a recording artist.
Yeah.
It's a reference book,
Yep.
and
Of all the things in that book, is there anything that now has been rendered wrong or irrelevant that back then was sage and good
Well,
advice?
I think the I think a lot of the underlying business advice, about building a team, and
Yep.
certainly not signing anything unless you've had somebody have a music industry attorney, not like a real estate attorney,
Right.
have a look at a contract for you. That's still valid.
Yeah.
But I remember I had like these tips, tips on being on the road, and back then, before cell phones,
Yeah.
there were a couple times I just go off partying with people and not know where I was. You
Yeah.
wind up in another town or whatever. And so I was always like, make sure to bring the business card of the hotel that you're at, and
Very
make sure you have change with you so you can make it. And you read it now, it's silly, but back
right.
then in the 80s,
That's how it was.
yeah. It's a funny story about our guitar player, Brian. This is funny. he wound up he wound up going out, with some girls or whatever. And we did not know where he was for a day. And we had to leave. The tour bus left without him.
Oh man.
We were going to our next show, opening for Bon Jovi somewhere. And literally, he didn't show up till that afternoon.
Oh
And we
my
had,
God.
we had no way, there were no cell phones back then. There was no way to get a hold of anybody other than like calling the production office if you,
Right.
you had that number. So that's
I love that. Well,
some of
Mark,
some
I
of this.
I
Yeah.
love this conversation, and I we could do a part two anytime, but I really so appreciate your time and hearing about all of the things that kind of made you who you are. And I didn't even get into you hiking up in the Himalayas and Mount Everest or all the places you've been, but in another story we'll get to all that, the non-musical things. But I so appreciate everything, and I look forward to seeing you in person again sometime soon.
You will be seeing me sooner than you think.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day, and I will talk to you soon. All right.
Thanks, Robbie.